If the US wants to take its ball and go home, there's not much Canada can do about it. But it does have us thinking more about what we can control.
I feel like a big bubble has been burst for a lot of Canadians. And I think a lot of people are realizing how much stuff they're buying is actually not from Canada. There's seeds that have been planted in the consumers' heads. People like, I don't want to be dependent on America, screw America. And it was a really important kick in the butt that I think Canadians needed.
Gagan Singh is a farmer, and what he thinks we can take into our own hands is where we get our food. Hi, I'm Paul Haberstrood. Welcome to The Cost of Living. We grow a lot of food in this country. Just not everything. And it's not always that cheap. But could that change? Also today, the cord-cutting revolution was supposed to disrupt cable forever. So why does streaming now look and cost so much like cable? Up first, the threat of tariffs, tariff talk, and now tariff realities have been such a constant for Canada in the last few months, it can make you lose sight of the fact that this whole thing is weird. We've heard the Trump administration's reasons for tariffs. Bring back manufacturing jobs, make America great again. But blowing up a global trading order that's made your country rich, alienating your friends around the world, pushing your own economy towards a recession, this is not business as usual. Justin Wolfers is a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan. He's here to help us make sense of all this. Justin, hi.
Hey.
Could you give us a word to describe what's happening right now?
Madness. The policy is a mistake. Tariffs generally. The entire industrialized world has spent the last century becoming more interconnected so that we can trade with each other, benefit from each other, have better relationships with each other. It's madness because we have a president who has probably made an intellectual error at the age of 19, which is not really understanding the economics of global trade, and is stuck by that. And that's okay because we all make mistakes. But in this presidency, he's surrounded himself with people who seem unable or unwilling to explain that to him. And so he's embarked on probably the most damaging economic own goal of my lifetime. Trump is making it difficult for 340 million of us, that is those of us within the United States, to trade with everyone else. It's going to be expensive for us to buy stuff from abroad, and retaliatory tariffs are going to make it difficult for us to send our stuff abroad. The other 7.66 billion people in the world, they've got a lot of other people to make friends with, to trade with, to form relationships with, to work with, to buy and sell to and from. And so that's the sense in which this is ultimately going to hurt Americans more than anyone.
Well, when you look at those other countries, Canada among them, it looks like Trump is trying to blow up the global trading order. Can the rest of us basically excise the U.S. out of that order and say, all right, well, if you don't want to be our friend, we'll be friends with each other and carry on?
The path forward you just described works well for my native country of Australia, which is physically very distant from the United States and has many, many trading partners in its local region that are not closely tied to the United States. Canada, of course, is incredibly close. You're probably 20 miles away from me right now. I'm coming to you from Michigan. So Canada does have a peculiar problem. So, Paul, I hope you don't mind. I actually just want to say to your listeners, I'm sorry. I know I didn't vote for him, but I'm sure that almost no one who voted for him said, you know what I really want you to do is threaten Canada's sovereignty. In fact, I'm not aware of that having been said during the campaign once. I don't know a single other American who thinks that's a good idea. I understand how threatening that is. And it's not just your sovereignty, of course. These tariffs are also going to blow up an enormous number of incredibly productive trading relationships. I live right next to the auto industry, and that straddles the border. Canadians made good faith investments in that based on the promises of previous American administrations that we're all getting married and we're going to have no tariffs between our countries forever. I still think that's exactly the best way forward. What's going to be difficult is when America wakes up to that reality, whether Canadians will ever trust us again.
Again, when you think, okay, the U.S. has been at the center of so much global trade. They've got friends around the world, Canada maybe foremost amongst that. And now they seem to be turning their back on that friends and willfully so, deliberately so. I just still can't wrap my head around why the U.S. would think it doesn't need to be friends with other countries.
Okay, so I want to be clear about two things. One, it's not the U.S., it's President Trump. He comes from the world of real estate. He has a zero-sum mentality. He thinks that business is pure competition and that if I win, you lose. If the pie is fixed, then if I can force a loss on you, it must create a win for me. The problem with this is it's a severely impaired view of economics. In fact, it fails to understand the most important ideas in economics. Economics is fundamentally about cooperation. It's the ways in which you and I can work together, say to build a car, to do so more efficiently than if you had to build the whole car on your side of the border and I had to build the whole car on my side of the border. So what we do through international trade is we expand the size of the pie. We both end up better off. And so if you don't have this sense that what our role is to grow the pie, to make each other better off, then you end up with this zero-sum mentality, and I think that's what's going on.
Well, if we look at the zero-sum mentality and we sort of focus in on some of the details of just what just happened with the global tariffs that were announced, I mean, we know Trump has long fixated on the idea of trade deficits. A trade deficit is the difference between how much a country, like let's say Vietnam, exports to the U.S. versus how much the U.S. exports back to Vietnam. Now, Trump sees a trade deficit in some ways as a subsidy. He thinks his tariffs are part of fixing that. Does that make sense to you?
No, it's an intellectual error on its face. Paul, do you have the store Trader Joe's in Canada?
We don't have Trader Joe's. A lot of Canadians kind of wish we did, but the people slide across the border and get their taco chips and stuff.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me what I should use instead of Trader Joe's, but think about your local supermarket. I have a trade deficit with my local supermarket. I go there and I spend a lot of money at my local supermarket buying fruit and vegetables. And while I'm there, I sometimes take my old leftovers from last night's dinner and try to sell them to the supermarket, but the supermarket never buys them because I'm a terrible cook. So what that means is I have a trade deficit with the local supermarket. Now, if you were Trump, and if you had a weakened sense of relationships, you would worry that you were being screwed. And so this error is entirely what drives the latest round of U.S. tariffs.
This isn't exactly rocket science. It seems very clear. You put it, you said, this is an own goal for the U.S., and it's going to cause suffering for Canada and a whole bunch of other countries around the world. And what I just can't, this is so weird. That's not even a question for you, but can you pick up the ball there?
Yeah, so what we have is one very flawed man with one very flawed idea. Now, you might say, how did that happen? There is a howl of pain. There are people who are not being well served by the modern economy. There are people who are rightly frustrated that Washington has been more about deal making and looking after protected interest groups and not looking after regular folks like you and, and so they're angry. And I think there are many reasons to be angry at Washington. They were angry. And so they wanted to raise a middle finger to Washington, and Trump was the only middle finger in town. So there isn't a reason that we did that. The unfortunate fact is we just happened to elect someone whose intellectual understanding of parts of the world is incredibly stunted. In the first administration, he had some adults in the room. The first set of Trump tariffs led one of his economic advisors, Gary Cohn, to actually resign. The problem is this MAGA movement, which is angry and has maybe even a well-founded anger, has organized itself around a bunch of principles. Some of those principles include red hats. Some of them include a sense of grievance, and it's easier to blame the rest of the world for your woes. And so they're organized around the idea that tariffs are a good thing. That is scripture. It is not to be questioned. And there's no one in the White House right now saying, hold on, this is crazy. The only thing that saves us right now is we do know this president follows the stock market pretty closely, and the American stock market is saying in absolutely clear terms, this is incredibly destructive. The question we're going to learn is whether the president has sufficient hubris that he thinks he's smarter than all of Wall Street. And that when Wall Street says this is crazy, will he still persist?
Well, if we take this tariff scripture as gospel for a second, theoretically then, what is the theoretical endgame for Trump with these tariffs?
That the United States becomes increasingly self-sufficient. That's his goal. Now, first of all, we could just talk about the poverty of that view. If you're not enriched by all of the wonders of the rest of the world, you could imagine that there's a military advantage to being completely self-sufficient, but also I'm not quite sure I see an enormous national security threat from importing avocados from Mexico. The United States becomes self-sufficient. We have one other economy in the world that's largely self-sufficient. It's North Korea. It's not an economic model that I would recommend to anyone, but it is possible to have an economy that is shut off from the rest of the world.
How do you think Canada will end up faring in all of this?
It will cause economic pain for Canada to adjust. The only really good news for Canada is that it moved from having been arguably the country most in the crosshairs of the Trump administration, maybe apart from China. But I mean, there was a point a month or so ago where we had the highest tariffs against Canada of all countries, of any country. Actually, Canada came out of this last round remarkably well. And so it may be that tariffs on other countries are so much worse that still doing business with Canada turns out to be okay.
Well, I don't know if it was exactly your place to issue an apology and a sorry, but as a country who is very comfortable with saying sorry, we appreciate that, Justin. Thank you for the sorry. We'll take it, and sorry that you had to say sorry. But thank you all.
That might be the most Canadian thing I've ever heard. Apologizing that I had to apologize.
We can only be ourselves. Justin Wolfers, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Paul.
Justin Wolfers is a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan. This is The Cost of Living. Listen to us on CBC Radio 1 and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Paul Haberstrood. Remember when Netflix arrived and the promise that you could save a bundle by getting rid of cable? Almost all the TV you could want at your fingertips for $8 a month. Now, it's $18 and you get some of what you want. To get everything, it kind of starts looking like your old cable bill. Whatever happened to streaming making things cheaper?
Nicholas Tupin lives in Campbell River, BC, and he loves his TV.
Just kind of flipping through here. I got Prime Video, Apple TV, Disney Plus, Netflix.
But to get all of the streamers he wants, 13 in total, it would cost him nearly $200 a month.
You know, we always think it's convenient and cheap to pay for these streaming services, but when you add it all up, I realized how expensive it is.
And that's turned Nicholas into a kind of TV nomad.
For example, Disney's like, watch everything I want, and then unsubscribe. And then I can see that Crave is on sale. And then once I've seen everything I want to see, I'll unsubscribe. And you kind of rotate through stuff that way.
Have you no loyalty, no feeling of loyalty at all?
No.
In the industry, this is known as churn. Churn is one of the reasons some streamers are struggling. Apple TV is bleeding money, Paramount Plus is more of a minus, and Peacock is not exactly cock of the walk these days.
There's still too many competitors. There are too many streamers.
Vincent Georgi is a professor of film marketing at the University of Windsor. He says the streaming market has just gotten too crowded, especially with the emergence of so many free options with funny names like Tubi Pluto and Plex.
It's the equivalent of too many pizza places opened on the same street, yet none of them have closed yet. So there's only so much pizza the market is purchasing, and there's slimmer margins and more competition.
To keep people from switching, the big streamers are now turning to more live events and sports.
Prime Video, home of Prime Monday Night Hockey.
Netflix just bought the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, and the Academy Awards were broadcast for the first time this year on Hulu.
And the Oscar goes to...
It wasn't exactly a great night for Oscar on Hulu when the feed went dead. But even with these embarrassing glitches, people are paying up. A new report by the Convergence Research Group shows Canadians spent 15% more on streaming last year compared to the year before. And part of that increase is because more people have multiple subscriptions. Dwayne Benefield is the Chief Product Officer for TELUS. He says Netflix, Disney Plus, and Prime Video are what Canadians are watching most.
Roughly half of Canadians have at least two of those. A third have all three already.
But Dwayne wants to see that number go even higher. That's why TELUS is now offering its customers a package deal, Netflix, Disney, and Prime all together for one price. He says bundles create that elusive loyalty streamers are looking for.
It reduces the natural churn. So that also is an advantage to these streamers. That you're providing bundled economics that allow them to maintain their subscriptions with all three without having to consider canceling every 3 months. So it's a win-win.
But marketing professor Vincent Georgi says who's winning and who's losing all depends on how you look at it.
You're still paying, you could be paying, $25, $30, $40 a month, which ends up looking more and more like an old cable bill.
In a way, Vincent says we've come full circle. Streamers, once touted as the cheaper alternative to cable, are becoming more like the thing they were going to replace. As for Nicholas Tupin in Campbell River, well, he's never paid a cable bill and probably never will. Instead, he's sticking to his strategy of paying for one streamer at a time.
Yeah, just kind of seeing what's on sale and cycling through. That's, I guess, the way I do it.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Blair Sanderson.
On your Radio NY podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Habershood. We know Buy Canadian has some traction. Maybe it's because people want to stick it to Trump or support local. But, Danielle Nerman, on a deeper level, there's also this idea of self-sufficiency. People wondering if relying on the U.S. is such a good idea anymore.
Especially for the important stuff, like food. I'm seeing a lot of people at the grocery store taking their time, pulling out their bifocals, examining labels, looking for the maple leaf.
And the stores are putting that out there because they really want us to know what's Canadian.
Yeah, there is a lot of demand to get Canadian-made products on shelves. And you know who's feeling that pressure? Local food growers.
Well, they just want more. They want more and more.
That's John Lomo. He's the co-founder of Fieldless, which is a vertical farm in Cornwall, Ontario. So John grows leafy greens and mushrooms year-round, indoors, and it's a pretty big operation, 60,000 square feet. But everything John grows, he sells. And right now,
we are selling out 2 to 4 times faster, in some instances, maybe 5 times faster in kind of high volume stores than we were before all this was happening. And so that's a pretty strong sign that people have moved in the direction of wanting to buy local more.
So his stuff is just like flying off the shelf.
Oh, yeah. And the company even increased its prices by $1 last month.
And demand is still going up. So are they changing the way they're doing anything?
Yes, they're planning to build another farm. They recently launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise money, and John says people are stepping up.
like in spades. We have hundreds of people that have already invested in the company, and we really do attribute a lot of that to the Buy Canadian movement that's going on.
So listen to this. It's only been a month, and they've almost hit their goal, $2.2 million.
That money's coming in. All right. So it sounds like they're going to be growing more lettuce. What about other stuff? Can we grow other stuff too?
Sure, and we are. Our greenhouse industry is churning out about 20% more veggies today than 5 years ago. And of course, we are known for growing big crops like wheat and pulses, and we export a lot of that to other countries. Canada also grows a lot of fruits and veggies, but our growing season is short. Summer is fleeting here.
Yes, it is.
Tomatoes never ripen.
Well, they don't. And if you want tomatoes in the winter, that's where imports come in. We buy a lot of produce, fruits, veggies from other places.
Yeah, about 36% of our fruit comes from the U.S. and almost 70% of our vegetables. Lenore Newman is the director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley. And she says for decades, importing so much produce from the U.S. was no big deal.
It was just very easy for a long time to rely on them. And, it just worked until it didn't.
Until it didn't is like code for Trump's tariffs are messing this up.
Yeah, all this trade uncertainty, Lenore thinks now is the time for Canada to really focus on food security.
How would we do that?
She says we could grow even more produce all year round. And there's actually a model out there for us, the Netherlands.
Really?
Yeah, the country is smaller than Nova Scotia, but it is the second largest exporter of vegetables in the world after the U.S.
I would not have guessed that. I would have thought it would have been a big country like a Brazil.
Right? But the Dutch, they are so good at growing food. They do it in greenhouses with very little fertilizer, water, and labor. They use a lot of solar. In the Netherlands, roughly 5,500 hectares of land, or 2 million NHL hockey rinks, is dedicated to growing vegetables indoors. And the reason for that has a lot to do with history.
During World War II, they had extreme hunger. They left that war never wanting to experience that again, so they invested heavily in agricultural technology and in supporting their farm sector and ensuring that they were an agricultural superpower. And they are.
So they did this out of necessity, and here it's not exactly wartime, but Trump's tariffs do have Canada thinking about stuff like security of food supply in a way that we just haven't in a long, long time.
Yeah, and Lenore says if we want to be more self-reliant, we need to supercharge our agricultural industry like the Netherlands did. She says Canada needs to be investing more money in a few key areas like food manufacturing. We send a lot of our produce to the U.S. to be washed, graded, and packaged, and then we buy it back. We re-import it. Lenore says we could be doing more of that ourselves and expand our greenhouse industry even more. Canada already grows strawberries year-round inside. We just don't do it on a large scale yet.
What about other stuff that we're not really known for growing, like more exotic stuff that we still want, your mangoes and pineapples?
Well,
you can grow anything year-round. You just can't do it and make any money. So it's way smarter to buy oranges from Spain. And there's no problem with that. It's not like it's morally weird. We've been trading for 10,000 years at least. And in fact, the first trade goods were foods. They were mostly spices.
So import the stuff that doesn't make economic sense to grow here, like oranges, and grow more of what does, like lettuce.
Okay, great. But what about the stuff that goes beyond lettuce? Does Canada have the wherewithal to grow everything we want?
So there are some challenges, as there always are. Many farmers are retiring, and their kids don't always want to take over their business. And if you do want to get into farming from scratch, it's tough because land is really expensive. But you can also look at someone like Gagan Singh. He was lucky. He inherited 8 acres in Abbotsford, BC, about a year ago. And I discovered him on Instagram trying to dig a well in what looked like a swamp. Gagan says learning to farm has been the hardest thing he's ever done. But he has met a lot of young people who want to get their hands dirty.
Being a farmer is now a dream in Canada. It's like this fairy tale, ooh, living on a farm and having a cow and growing my own food. The younger generation, young bucks like me, they do want to get into farming. They don't want to sit there behind a computer for 10 hours a day doing some work for God knows who.
Okay, let's say he's right. Let's say the young bucks are all in on farming. Governments invest even more than they are now in small farms, big farms, greenhouses. We do all the things. Can Canadian produce, what we grow here, can it compete on price?
So right now, no. Locally grown produce is typically more expensive than imported, especially in the winter.
Canadian farmers cannot compete against Chinese and Mexican farmers because everything's cheaper there. They have less regulations, lower labor costs. The reason we're importing so much is because people just want the best possible price.
And this is really why we have the global food system we have. It's because of economies of scale. Every country specializes in growing what they can grow best, and they trade. And let's face it, this has been good in a lot of ways for customers. People don't like paying more for stuff.
No, but Gagin says local produce could get cheaper if we grow more of our own food year-round, because when you increase supply, prices go down.
Well, sure, but that's not like something that happens overnight.
No. It takes a while.
Right, like maybe decades. And right now, yes, we are definitely fired up to buy Canadian. A lot of people are, but who knows if that changes?
You know, everyone I talked to said the same thing. There's always going to be people who are price-driven, who will always buy the cheaper head of lettuce from Mexico. But Gagin Singh thinks something has changed, and some of us will never go back to shopping how we used to.
I feel like a big bubble has been burst for a lot of Canadians. And I think a lot of people are realizing how much stuff they're buying is actually not from Canada. There's seeds that have been planted in the consumers' heads. People like, I don't want to be dependent on America, screw America. And it was a really important kick in the butt that I think Canadians needed.
If there's one thing we know we want, it's a secure food supply. Food is so important.
Right? Like, we all eat. All right, thanks, Danielle.
You're welcome.
That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Danielle Nerman, Blair Sanderson, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. I'm Paul Habertrud. Thanks for listening.